Welcome back, viewers. You join me for some science, specifically the science of heart rate and energy burn while riding an e-bike. Now, I understand that those words constructed in that sentence is probably enough for many of you to instantly switch this video off, but that's fine, because now that you're gone, you're not going to hear me call your mum fat. As for the rest of you, thank you for sticking with me, and I'll do my best to make this as entertaining as possible. Now, as you may or may not be aware, I just completed a series of videos in which I compared an e-bike to a normal bike to see what we could learn. And we did learn lots of stuff and things. But of all the things, the most alarming was after an hour of riding the e-bike, my energy burn was substantially higher, according to Strava, than it was after riding my normal bike for an hour. I was a bit baffled because, let's not mince words, an hour on an e-bike is substantially easier than an hour on a normal bike. Now, this being the case, I wasn't quite willing to accept the numbers coming out of Strava without diving into it a bit deeper. And that's the plan today. So let me explain how I plan to do that. Well, quite simply, assuming the weather holds out, because it is a bit grey outside at the moment, I'm going to go for a bike ride. But I'm going to record my heart rate on a number of different heart rate devices, and then do a big comparison at the end to see what they all say. In the red corner, we have the device on which I record all of my activities. It is my Apple Watch SE model, which I assume means super excellent. And it will be recording an e-bike ride in the Strava app, which will send straight off to Strava for Strava to do whatever they do with it. At the same time, I will be also recording on my wife's Apple Watch. And you can tell it's my wife's watch because it is rose gold with the coral band, which to my eyes looks pink. Anyway, it's also going to be recording in the Strava app, but it's going to be recording an indoor activity. So as far as it's aware, I'm just doing push-ups somewhere. Now, theoretically, it's going to record my heart rate exactly the same way as this one, but with no GPS. So it has no capacity to consider how far I may or may not have gone. But I don't think two's enough. In addition to the two watches, I'm also wearing a heart rate monitor under my man boobs. It's a Polar strap, which is going to send data straight to the Polar app. Now, as we all know, when it comes to heart rate monitoring, there's nothing better than a heart rate strap. So this is going to be the benchmark upon which the results from both of these will be compared. Theoretically, they should all agree. I do hope the comparative results from the three straps will be illuminating, but if it's not, well, I've still been out for a bike ride, so, you know, it's still a win. Well, it's not going to get any less grey outside, so I better crack on and do some sick jumps, and I'll check back in with you shortly. Borromo. Oh, right. Dropping in for crackers downhill. Now, I'll be honest, I'm a bit nervous. I've ridden this place about 1 million times, but I've never attempted to talk to the camera while doing it. So, fingers crossed this goes all right. No. So far so good. Down into 3 megos. 1, 2, 3. If you don't have an e-bike, you'll probably stop here and push back up. Otherwise, continue on. It gets a bit rocky and droppy from this point. And steep. Whoa. I don't really know this bit of track very well. And out. Push up. This one's not going to be a record. That's a bit poo. That's not a good place to walk. That's not a good place to walk up. Cut. Well, I reckon this might be my last lap. There is way too many pedestrians. Jeez. Yeah, for a nice easy run to the bottom. Easy over the rocks, I mean. And that's it. That's Crackers Downhill. Short, but busy. It's a free facility that's always maintained. It's really well built, super fun. It's just if you end up down the bottom, you're stuck with this. Now I understand there's bound to be people who regularly ride this loop on a normal bike, but you know, I also understand there are people who juggle chainsaws. And good on them. Alright, well I reckon that's time to pull the pin. I've done 54 minutes and about 11 kilometers. I reckon that's probably enough for what this exercise is. Besides, all the kids have arrived and they're doing what kids do. Rad jumps and just generally getting in the way. Which is, you know, it's fine, they're kids. It's their turn, I've had my laps, it's their turn now. Anyway, back to the car, download some data and see what's what. Single Trail Racks, not a sponsor, paid for it myself, very expensive but very good, highly recommended. Time to press stop on all of the devices. Let's see if I can do this at the same time, which of course I can't because I have 3 but only 2 hands, attached to which are 2 watches. Finish, 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 stop. Oh, someone hit a 6. I'm going to have to wait till I get home because I need to download it to the various devices, but average heart rate 139, average heart rate 140, average heart rate 140. So far so good. So there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that the heart rate data which we pulled out of the Apple Watches was, for our purpose, near as makes no difference, the same as the heart rate data which we pulled out of the sophisticated chest strap. When we looked at the data, we found that both the maximum and average heart rates were pretty much the same, and the same can be said for the way in which all of the devices mapped our heart rate across the entirety of the ride. Now, I understand there are certain heart rate geeks out there that don't like the expression pretty much the same, because in their world, pretty much the same isn't the same as absolutely correct. And they are right. If you are doing interval training or some other exercise that requires very accurate, very prompt heart rate data, the watches can be a bit problematic because they do have a bit of a lag. And that's not an Apple problem, it's just the way they work. My Garmin watch before this did the same thing, and my TomTom watch before that also did it. But if you're doing interval training, you probably already know this, and you're probably using one of these. But we're not doing interval training, we're riding mountain bikes, so these are fine. And now for the bad news. If you're like me, and you ride an e-bike, and you put all your data on Strava, you should pay absolutely no attention to how many calories Strava claims you are burning. But why is this, I hear you ask? You just explained that my Apple Watch records heart rate just as well as this chest strap. Well, Strava don't use heart rate in their calculations at all. Strava do not consider how hard you're working when determining how many calories you burnt. Now I know this sounds insane, but let me explain to you how this works. In order to calculate how many calories you burn on a bike ride, Strava only need 3 bits of information. They need to know how much you and your bike weigh as a combination, they need to know how far you've gone, and they need to know your elevation gain, which is how many mountains you climbed. You'll notice that heart rate isn't in this list anyway. So what Strava do with this information is a little bit complicated, but it's also very elegant, so let me walk you through it. Effectively, they take your total distance and total elevation gain and consider this relative to how much you and your bike weigh. By knowing your total weight and the total distance travelled, they're able to calculate how much power was required to take you that far. Now that they have a total power figure, they apply what they call a coefficient for human efficiency, which effectively is just an algorithm to work out how much human energy or calories is required to make that much power. And that's your calorie burn. Well, why would they do it this way? Well, quite simply, this is a pretty good way of doing it, which is ordinarily fairly accurate, assuming all things are equal. But as we know, on e-bikes, things aren't equal. When I go for an e-bike ride, I make an amount of power. But unlike a normal ride where all of that power comes from my legs, which are fueled by my love handles, on an e-bike ride, most of that power is coming from the motor, which is fueled by the battery. And this is where Strava's going wrong. They are making no compensation for the fact that I have a motor. They are quite incorrectly giving me the credit for the production of all of this power. They think I must have burnt thousands of calories in order to make this, when in reality I burnt hundreds, but I also flattened my battery. Let me give you an example that illustrates this point very clearly. Last week, I went out and recorded a 30-kilometre e-bike ride on Strava, at the end of which Strava claimed I'd burnt 1,700 calories, which on a ride like this would seem reasonable. But I wasn't actually riding my bike. What I was actually doing was driving my car home from work. If you look at the heart rate data within the activity, you'll see that I was maintaining a blissful, almost clinically dead average heart rate of 69 beats per minute. Quite simply, there is no prospect at that heart rate I burnt 1,700 calories. In fact, I was wearing this chest strap during the same activity, and according to Polar, I burnt a much more reasonable 91 calories, which is about 2/3 a can of Coke. Thank you, Sydney traffic. So what does this mean for those of us who have raced out and bought e-bikes? Are we all suddenly going to get fat because we're apparently doing no exercise? No. I went back and looked at all the heart rate data from those comparison videos I filmed previously, and in terms of heart rate, the e-bike and the normal bike, they're the same. Irrespective of what bike I was riding, most of my time was spent in the same heart rate zone. That means, from a cardiovascular point of view, on both bikes I'm doing the same exercise. Yes, there were several occasions on the normal bike when my heart rate would go much higher because I was working much harder on the climbs, but these were offset by periods of much lower heart rate when I would stop and rest. These were rest breaks I simply wasn't taking on the e-bike. So across the entire ride, the effort was more or less the same. In terms of fitness, in terms of weight loss, in terms of aerobic exercise, it's the same on both bikes. But now in saying that, I want to point out that I have a feeling that on the e-bike there's going to be a resistance exercise deficit. What I mean by that is on the e-bike I'm simply not pedaling as hard, which means my muscles mustn't be working as hard. And this is probably something we're going to have to look at in terms of cross-training. But that's a discussion for another video. The point of this is to clarify, if you stumble across a video on YouTube in which they claim you will burn substantially more energy on an e-bike compared to a normal bike in the same time period, this is simply not true. And I include myself in this because I just made 3 videos in which I made that exact statement. The problem is the data that we were relying upon to make this assessment is simply wrong. Yes, on the e-bike, I don't tend to have these enormous peaks of heart rate, which lead to the crushing fatigue, so my e-bike rides tend to be longer, and because they're longer, I'm burning more calories because I'm just out for longer. Now, I will say there is merit to the idea that e-bikes are a gateway to activity. That is, people who wouldn't ordinarily be exercising are now out doing exercise because it's much easier on an e-bike. That is true. But this idea that I'm burning twice the calories in the same time period, that's just nonsense. And that's that. It's starting to rain again, and there is a very noisy bird out there somewhere, so I'm going to wrap it up. If you did enjoy this video and you found it informative or entertaining, you may want to consider subscribing. Otherwise, I'll see you on the trail.